Hey guys, hope you're having a good Friday so far. I should be in Florida at this point. Hopefully I made it there safely. I want to go over what we're going to be doing for today, as well as what I expect you to have done for me by the time I get back next Tuesday. You will have an assignment. It will be due next block day, so that should be September 7th, somewhere along there. Whatever the end of the next block day is going to be, that's when your homework assignment is going to be due. It is on Mastering Environmental Science. It is 10 questions long. So we ended off talking about Millennium Ecosystem Assessments. Hold on, I'm finding where I am in my notes. Okay, so that's where we ended off. So the most important thing that the assessment figured out is that the ecosystems are continually degrading and that we are way overexploiting our ecosystems. 60% of these goods and services are being either completely degraded or being used unsustainably. And we're going to have a definition for unsustainable here in a minute. It's not just the ME assessment that has found this. Other assessments have found similar things. Pretty much the only thing that's not declining right now is our food production, which, pretty important. This has kept pace, at least in crops, so things that we're growing, has kept pace with population growth. Improving health and life expectancy for millions means that our food production needs to definitely increase. But many ecosystem goods and services have declined, so groundwater, not as clean as it used to be. Soil, not as clean. Wild fish and forests, way, way, way deep down. This is due to the way we use our land. We just kind of go out and we use it. We don't think about, hey, if I'm cutting down this tree, I need to make sure I'm planting a new one so that I have something in the future. And I know I'm going to be going through these slides a little bit quickly. Feel free to pause the video whenever you want, and you can either go back and listen to what I say again, or you can continue on. Or just copy on the slide. The slides are all on Schoology, so that shouldn't be too big of an issue. Alright, so we have our 4 paradoxes that we talked about earlier. And if you remember, hypothesis 1 said that, hey, this whole thing's a big old lie. We're not doing as well as we think we are, so it doesn't really make any sense that we're saying that we're getting better and the ecosystem's getting worse, because we're not all that better. Well, we have rejected that. You'll remember we talked about how, in general, life expectancies are longer, education's getting better, all of those things. So we are better off than we were. And hypothesis 2 is confirmed. Our food production is currently outweighing the effects of lost ecosystem services. So right now we can make up food, even though it's not coming necessarily from the natural ecosystem. Paradox further explained by hypothesis 3 and 4. So remember, hypothesis 3 said something along the lines of technology can substitute our natural goods and services, which is clearly what's happening. We're able to grow food that is not directly coming from the environment. This has a lot to do with our agriculture, things like that. Hypothesis 4, the lag between the loss of goods and services and their impact. So our ecosystem's getting worse. We will feel it, but not right now. And that's kind of the conclusion. So the conclusion is going to be, yes, our ecosystem's getting worse. No, we don't feel it, but we absolutely will. So we generate 80 million tons of CO2 every day, which is an astronomical amount. That comes from us burning oil, 91.3 million barrels, 324 billion cubic feet of natural gas, and 11.6 million tons of coal a day. This is not a year, this is not anything, this is a day that we are doing this. Now, may not sound bad. I know a lot of you guys had me for biology, and even if you didn't, you had Mr. Simmons. And so you know, hey, Miss Williams, carbon dioxide's a natural part of the atmosphere. Plants actually need it for photosynthesis. We can't get rid of all the CO2 in the earth, otherwise all the plants would die. And yeah, you're right. Plants absolutely need carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. It is their absolute requirement. But we produce way more CO2 than plants can possibly take up, which is ending up leading to what's called the greenhouse effect. Now, the greenhouse effect is when CO2 absorbs infrared light and traps that energy in the form of heat on the planet. So the greenhouse effect is CO2 trapping it. So just like when you walk into a greenhouse or under a tarp of some sort, it's kind of hot. That's because that greenhouse is trapping the heat inside, and that's the exact same thing that's happening in our atmosphere. And you can kind of see our amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. So it's risen 45% since the Industrial Revolution, so that's 1750, from 280 parts per million to 402 parts per million in 2014. So we're having just staggering growths here. You can see it's not looking like it's going to get any better anytime soon. Now you can kind of see this wavy red line here, and that's a wavy red line because every single summer, so the tops of the red lines are going to be during the summer, when the ocean gets warmer, it releases CO2. So it's releasing CO2 in the atmosphere over the summer, which is why it's up here. And down here, in the winter when it gets cold, the ocean absorbs that CO2. So you've got a little bit of a cycle back and forth, but the overall trend line there in black is pretty apparent what's happening. So global temperature increases since 1880. So we can kind of see, got some cold periods down here, some warmer periods up here. We're definitely getting into the warmer period. Not only are we getting into the warmer period, it's kind of significantly changed. All right, so the IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, this was established by the United Nations in 1988. It reports its assessments of climate change every 5 years. So the fifth assessment report, otherwise known as IR5, published 2013-2014, looked at the input of thousands upon thousands of experts and hundreds of authors, and it produced convincing, and I'm underlining the word convincing, evidence. Human-induced climate change is severely affecting global climate, and it concluded that future changes could be catastrophic if emissions of greenhouse gases are not controlled. And I want to say this, that convincing evidence in science is a really big term. Remember, in science, we don't really just say, oh, we've proven something 100%. No, convincing means we know this is true in science speak. And could be, scientists tend to downplay things sometimes. Could be catastrophic is much more leaning towards is absolutely going to destroy our whole world. So, make sure you're kind of thinking about what these words mean in science. There's a clear consensus. Science agrees that global climate change is a huge problem, and regardless of where this global climate change came from, anything that we can do to slow it down should be done. So solving climate change problems is not going to be easy, but I want to give you guys a definition of mitigation before we move on, because I think that mitigation is a word that gets thrown around a lot but isn't really defined. When you mitigate something, you kind of stop it or you lessen it. So right now we're trying to mitigate flood damage in our area. So we're trying to stop it or slow it down. So when we're talking about mitigating climate change, we're talking about reducing CO2 emissions. However, this is kind of at odds with that whole thing that we were talking about on Wednesday. We want to make these fixes, we want to help our environment, but we don't want to be the ones that are making sacrifices in order for that to happen. And the short-term economic impacts of reducing fossil fuels are going to be in conflict with the impacts of climate change. We don't want to give up our dollars now. We don't want to stop our economy now. So our economy is running on those millions of barrels of oil and those cubic feet of natural gas. That's what our economy is running on. And we don't want to slow down our economy to stop climate change in the future. Now, the poorest among us are going to be hit hardest because they depend the most on natural ecosystems that are going to be damaged. So for us, we can replace a lot of our food production and things like that with technology because we have the money as a country. When you're talking about third world countries, they don't have the money to feed and support their population. Their population is farming. Their population is going out and hunting. Their population is going out and fishing. Every day when they go out, what they bring back is what they're eating. And so us damaging their access to that food and to those ecosystems is going to damage them the most. Now, there are some international agreements to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but they've really had limited success just because countries have to work together and independently. It's easy to make an agreement to something. It's way harder to actually follow through on it. Now, biodiversity. So we're really quickly losing our biodiversity, and as a quick definition, biodiversity is the variability among living organisms. So we're losing this. We're losing our range of different organisms. So a couple of the ways that we're doing this is we're turning natural land into crops and cities. So where a wolf used to roam, there's now a school there. There's now a hospital there. So there can't be wolves there because there's now a school or hospital. On top of that, we have pollution that is degrading the habitats that we already have. We are way overusing it for commercial value. And we're hunting and killing species illegally. I'm sure you guys have heard of big game hunting in Africa, which is all well and dandy and great. It's when poaching comes into play that you really start having the issues. Species are declining in their range or population size, mostly in the tropics and in freshwater. And that's partially because that zone, while it can support a lot of the life there is really delicate and it needs exact conditions. So when you change those exact conditions, you're going to have massive die-off. Just since 1970, 10,000 population of vertebrates and over 3,000 species have declined by 50%. So why should we care? Okay, so we're not going to have any more zebras in the future. How does that affect me? Well, the issue is that agriculture and biodiversity are the mainstay of crops and medicines. We get a ton of our life, our food, our medication from the wildness of life. It helps maintain the stability of natural ecosystems. So if you have a whole bunch of different things, they're not likely to all get sick at once and die. It provides essential goods and services, especially for the poor, and we already talked about that. And there's an aesthetic and moral argument for biodiversity. Aesthetics is how something looks. So, this looks pretty. I want to continue seeing a zebra. I want my kids to know what a zebra looks like. That would be an aesthetic quality. And once a species is gone, there's no bringing it back. It's gone forever. So human societies live in the natural world. We use these goods to make our own environment, towns, factories, highways. We change natural ecosystems, forests and meadows into farms, and we use the environment to dump waste. It's got to go somewhere. The environment is an inclusive concept. It has two different parts. So the environment is both the natural world and the human societies and our human-built world. So we've gotten really pretty good at changing the environment. We've domesticated landscapes to produce food for billions, and we've also domesticated landscapes so they don't attack us nearly as much. The Mississippi should flow directly over St. Francisville on a regular basis, but we've tamed her so that she kind of flows in one straight line rather than curving all over the place all the time. We've also converted natural materials into goods and structures. So we've changed that natural world into a world that we prefer to live in. Now, humans impact our environment in two ways. One, the cumulative impacts. So these are actions that become problems when there are too many people doing it. So mining in and of itself isn't an